It is not true that regulation holds poor people down or regulation keeps middle class from advancing. That's kind of patently.
There's your ever classy former governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley, talking to some publicly funded radio station. Joining us right now, Larry Kudlow, CNBC, never one to use tax dollars to get his message out. What do you think of Martin O'Malley? This is the guy who's challenging Hillary Clinton, I guess, for the nomination on the Democratic side, talking about how regulations, it has nothing to do with keeping small businesses down. Larry Kudlow?
Let me again, who's Martin O'Malley?
the governor of Maryland.
That apparently 1% of Democrats think might make a good president.
I got it. Okay. God help us if we elect someone from Maryland. He's completely wrong. This is sort of some liberal left statist big government. You know, companies have expenses, and the federal government and the state governments add to those expenses by imposing any number of regulations, whether they're EPA regulations or labor law regulations or tax increases, which are a form of regulation. So I don't really know what specifically O'Malley is talking about. And I might add, I'd like to know his specifics because under the Obama administration, we have seen a quantum jump in regulations. For example, banking regulations, many people believe, have stifled credit creation and loans, and particularly smaller community banks and Main Street banks. So there's a problem for you. Obamacare regulations, okay? The cost of Obamacare taxes and regulations has been huge and has been a great growth impediment. So I'd like to specifically know what O'Malley is opposed to.
Well, and that's the thing about it. But, I mean, he's basically making the case that, that anybody who runs a small business could counter. That regulation, he says, doesn't strangle small businesses, which is ridiculous. Any businessman can tell you that you put more regulations on me, it's going to limit my ability to make money.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's a different system in Maryland.
Hey,
maybe,
Larry,
maybe they don't like capitalism.
Well, we finally got Larry Hogan.
Yeah, we finally got a Republican governor. We're hoping that changes.
It does call to question, though. You're such a champion for reducing the corporate taxes in America, and I'd love for your reflection on all the Republican candidates up in New Hampshire, if any of them sort of struck that chord with you and brought it home.
I didn't hear much of that. Now, I didn't hear every speaker, but I watched a bunch of them on C-SPAN,
right.
And I've been working with some of them, plus and minus. I didn't really hear much about the corporate tax, and that includes, not just the tax for large companies, but also the tax for small companies, many of which are family-owned or individually owned, and now pay a 40% tax rate plus Obamacare, et cetera. So I guess, I was a little disappointed. Generically, I've been a little disappointed in the GOP presentation so far. I hate to blanket everybody, but I don't think they're talking lower corporate taxes. I don't think they're talking very much about reforming and simplifying and flattening the tax rate in the individual tax code. And the one guy who has a comprehensive plan out there, Marco Rubio, very controversial plan, he didn't talk about taxes at all. He just kind of mentioned that I'm a tax reform guy, whereas in my opinion, his business tax cuts are pretty good. His individual tax cuts are terrible. The middle class is going to wind up paying higher marginal tax rates under Rubio, so he can get a child tax credit of $2 trillion, which only helps about, a quarter, a third of the population. So color me disappointed. See, here's the GOP. They're all lambasting Hillary. Okay, fine. I got that. But the point is, what are they telling the public about what they believe and what they would do? There's very little of that. Again, the GOP negativism, not yet promoting a really positive economic growth message, and that troubles me.
Larry and I were having a conversation earlier on the program about the fact that, 19 people showed up as potential GOP nominees in New Hampshire. And, we wondered sort of out loud, is it time to thin the herd a little bit? Because some of these people don't seem to be gaining much traction. Admittedly, it's very, very, very early in the process. Is it time to thin the herd a little bit and say to people, quite frankly, I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen for you this time?
Who's going to say that.
Well, I would,
you, Larry.
I know. I would say people like you, but also like Reince Priebus. That's his job, isn't it?
Listen, I'm a free market guy. So what you got here is a market, a proliferating market of presidential candidates.
Big supply there. What about the demand, Larry?
Well, that's true, and we're going to learn about that. That's exactly right. We really should have a futures market where prices go up and prices go
Right.
down.
Who are you selling short right now?
No, it'd be great fun. It would be terrific fun. They had the betting market, which they did away with.
They should let us do that.
Yeah.
University of Iowa, I think, still has its own market. Yeah, I want to see the market. But look, the first debate is in August, and I think that's going to be very important. And I want to see who's got the money to go through that debate and into the fall. We're really just beginning. But let me just say, I want to come back to this point. I don't want to be too repetitive. GOP, what is your message?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah.
How are you going to make me better? How are you going to give me more take-home pay, incentivize businesses, and new business starts and jobs? They're not really focusing on that. And, Hillary, I don't even know what Hillary's at. I wrote a column tongue-in-cheek saying she ought to be a JFK growth Democrat and cut tax rates across the board. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, that
I don't
would
think
be.
she's going to do that.
Well,
but it'd be kind of interesting. Where are the Republican JFK policies?
Yeah.
Where are the Republican Reagan policies? They're all pledging allegiance to Reagan in their speeches, but they don't walk through his economic growth, slashing tax rates and regulations. I'm waiting to hear that message.
Well, Hillary is very busy right now because, she's driving around New Hampshire in her Scooby van, apparently violating speed laws wherever she goes. And she was asked about this book that's coming out called Clinton Cash that suggests that perhaps there was a little quid pro quo. In other words, you got favorable treatment when she was Secretary of State if you were a foreign entity that made a big contribution to the Clinton Global Initiative, the CGI. And she says, well, that's just a distraction. It's just a distraction. Pay no attention to that. Is there some there in your mind, Larry?
Yeah, there may be. I know Peter Schweitzer, and he's a pretty credible journalist, in my opinion, stuff he's done in the past, frequent guest on our shows. And if he is connecting the dots, as you call it, the quid pro quo, then Mrs. Clinton's in a heap of trouble. There's no question about that. And I noticed in the rebuttals last night by Hillary and by John Podesta, her chairman, they didn't really deny anything. They're just trying to, ad hominem attack on Peter Schweitzer and blah, blah, blah. And then they started attacking Breitbart for running the Peter Schweitzer stuff or Drudge.
It was New York Times, for crying out loud.
Oh, that's right. The Clintons are attacking the Times. You're in a heap of trouble on that. So, they're trying to say there's no there. Let the public decide. I want to read this book because I know Peter Schweitzer, and as I say, I regard him as a credible journalist. So if you did something for me and I did something for you, and whoops, I'm the Secretary of State, and I wanted you to help my Clinton Foundation, and by the way, please pay my husband a couple of $100,000 more for his speeches. If that is proven, that could be devastating.
Yeah. All right, Larry Kudlow, we've got to leave it there. Thanks for being here. As always, Larry Kudlow, CNBC. And, of course, you can see his show. Listen to his show. You can see it, too, if you just keep staring at your radio. Here on WMAL, 7 p.m. Saturdays. Thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Larry.